Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Clauser, with the Center Square's investigative reporter, TJ Martinell, here to talk about Washington State again and again, repeating this account that it uses to fund low interest loans to cities to build vital public infrastructure. But instead, the state is taking this money and filling its operating deficits. TJ, why don't you tell us a little bit about this account and how long this has actually been going on for?
Yeah, so the Public Works Assistance Account is this account that was created in 1985, and it provides funding for a low interest revolving loans. That means that the loan interest payments go back into the account, and it allows local governments like cities, counties, special purpose districts to uh, get financing for projects at a lower interest rate than what the private market would provide, and they can build roads, bridges, they can build sewer and water facilities that, among other things, is critical for being able to build housing that everybody keeps talking about. Well, really starting in the 2000s, the state legislature started using this account and all the money sitting there to plug holes in the operating budget. And it kind of ramped up in the 2010s, but this last biennium, and with this new budget, it really is taking off. So between 1985 and 2017, $2.2 billion were diverted from this account. In this biennium alone, the 2025-27, it's going to be over $800 million. So that's just one biennium. And that's from an account that would be going to pay for other types of projects, and it's instead going to the general fund. And so there's I think the biggest thing really is how they've drained this account to where that has no more money. But on top of that, they're taking money that was allocated to projects that have been already approved for funding. So these are projects that the Public Works Board said, you know what, we're going to fund you. Here, you're authorized to get the funding. And the state legislature said, actually, no, we're going to take that money. And the way they're getting away with it is they are issuing bonding authority so that the Public Works Assistance Account will continue to get the money to the tune of, $389 million dollars for this biennium. So in other words, they're taking out, they're issuing bond debt to fund projects for a loan program that has a lower interest rate, right? It's like taking out a loan at 6% to pay off a loan that's at a 3% interest.
What's the risk here? Say the state it's pulling this money. I mean, it's one of many one-time transfers. They also pulled $880 million from the state's rainy day fund, about half of it to plug the deficit this year. What's the risk with this public works board account if the state can't repay this money on time? What happens to those projects? I mean, we're talking about roads and bridges, the types of infrastructure that we drive across every day. Not like these clean energy projects or other things that aren't as important for say day-to-day life.
Well, I think they're going to get the money from the bond uh uh debt. They're going to get that money. I don't think that that's the issue really. The issue is that they are effectively taking out debt to pay for operating budget expenditures. And for people who are familiar with our state, or if you're not familiar, Washington state does not allow the legislature to take out debt for its operating budget. It has to be a balanced budget, and it has to be balanced according to the forecasts that are done by the State Economic and Revenue Forecast Council. This really sets a dangerous precedent where the legislature can take out bond debt, which they're allowed to do for capital projects. Then what you could do is you could take a bunch of money from an account like this one, and then you just simply take out bond debt, which you can do because it's a capital um, budget account. And then you just put that money in. So it's where you can go into different accounts, take the money out of it, and use that to spend on the general fund. And then you take out bonding debt to put that money back into the account. And we've seen these kind of fiscal tricks and gimmicks. The same thing with the budget stabilization account. Under state law, you can't withdraw money from the account unless there's been a declared emergency, there's the revenue forecast is below a certain amount, or the legislature gives a two-thirds approval. What the legislature realized is if they divert the money before it ever gets into the account, they don't need to get that two-thirds majority or the declared emergency or the revenue stuff. So over the last couple of years, one of the ways that they've propped up this massive increase in state spending is by diverting money from the rainy day fund before it even gets there, which doesn't require a supermajority or a two-thirds majority in order to achieve. So that's what another thing that we could see here. And this is a fiscal trick that could be definitely used if there's a drop in revenue and if they don't get the tax revenue that they're expecting. So and it's really not being it's not getting the attention that I feel like it deserves because that this is effectively it's another example of how they're able to bypass state law on budgeting policies.
And you think of, bonding a capital project. Say you have this piece of infrastructure, a bridge, for example. You know it's gonna last at least 20 years, benefiting 20 years of taxpayers. So you might be willing to extend the payment. Say, "We'll pay off that total project over the course of 20 years with this bond." But now they're doing this with the operating budget. So you're essentially telling me that taxpayers are for this year's budget, say an employee's salary in the operating budget, that's being bonded out. So taxpayers for years to come will be paying off an employee's salary for this year.
Well, what they are gonna have to do is they're gonna have to pay the bond debt, and it's remained pretty stable. It's around 2 billion, $2.4 billion annually. It shifts and fluctuates, but it's pretty much 2 something $billion a year. But I s what I mean, it's a question of how desperate are state lawmakers gonna get when it comes to this complete unwillingness to cut spending on a collective or general level. And on top of that, you have a recession or a drop in revenue where they already have a budget deficit and they have at a time of record revenue level. What happens when they have a recession of the same time? And they've got a $20 billion deficit. This is I mean, $20 billion, I believe, is how much they owe. 24 billion is the bond debt that we have. But again, are our state and lawmakers willing to do that to maintain the spending? And every time people think that they're going to have to cut spending, they just raise taxes. And so at some point, this is a way to get around that because you don't have to raise taxes. You just take out debt. And if you do it in this way, because this went completely under the radar, $389 million in debt being taken out that indirectly plugs an operating budget gap, right? But it went completely under the radar. I don't think anybody else has picked up on it or put the pieces together. So that's one way they could get around this is just by taking out a bunch of bonding authority to deal with this, and nobody really notices because it's not a direct tax.
Isn't bonding authority limited though? I mean, how far can they go with this? I mean, they're draining this account now and bonding it back. I mean, you mentioned we could be in a drastic situation if we reach a recession. What happens if both of these accounts, the operating account and this public works account, are both facing shortfalls?
I mean, that's where it's gonna get a little frightening for local governments that need stuff to be funded, that need water and sewer, and it's gonna delay or indefinitely, potentially, housing development in areas where they can't get water and sewer, infrastructure there, because if you don't get it, you're not allowed to build. And they keep talking about why, talk about housing, unaffordability. Well, you can't increase the supply in areas where there's not sufficient infrastructure, and this is what this account was intended to fund were projects like these.
So I know you talked to AWC, the Association of Washington Cities, and you also talked to the Association of Washington Counties. Two major stakeholders. They represent pretty much every city, municipality, county across the state. What did they have to say about this?
I mean, it's a more of there's more of a bone for AWC because they're cities and they in special purpose districts get most of the money, most of the projects funded. And it's difficult for them because they need to have some certainty when they're applying for these project funding and to have funding from pre-approved, already approved projects taken away. And yeah, they're putting bond money into that, but that's not even half of the amount of money that they've taken out of this account. And so it really is going to, and I think the other thing that's worth noting is this account is partially funded by the real estate excise tax revenue that cities and local governments get. So they divert some of that money that they get to this account that is supposed to be for them. And then when they go to get the money to pay for projects, it's instead being taken and thrown into the general fund. I mean, there's one instance where a chunk of money is being taken from the Public Works Assistance account, and it's going to the Climate Commitment Act because they're withdrawing money from the Climate Commitment Act to go towards the working families tax credit. I mean, this is the kind of shifting and shell game that's going on
Mhm.
fiscally where money is being taken from one account to fund something else. And so this goes back to what I was saying about the bonding authority is they're using debt to indirectly prop up the state operating budget. And so where like you were saying, where does that end? And also what laws are lawmakers willing to change in order to expand that? Because they've done that with the Puget Sound Gateway project, where I think that they were bonding they authorized, bonding authority for, toll revenue. They made some policy change where they're basically, you know, gambling, one could argue, on future toll revenue. So that's where they could if there's a law that's in their way, they can just go change it. Or they can get around that law the same way they're getting around the balance apparently getting around the balanced budget requirement. So it's hard for for people to say, well, how do they do this? Well, I I apparently am not that creative or imaginative about how to get around and circumvent the law, but this is one of the ways that they've managed to do it. And whether that was not that was the intention, that's a separate issue. But it is a fact that it is something that they did. And this is in effect what it's done. And it sets a precedent for how they might respond to future fiscal crises in the state.
Mhm, and with this most recent deficit, it was about the governor put it at about $2 billion for the 2026 session. They filled much of it, with this transfer, the rainy day account,
Yeah.
like I mentioned, and these were framed as temporary measures to, help us, hurdle the challenges in front of us today. But as you've said, as you've uncovered, this has been going on with the public works account for years. I mean, at what point does it go from being temporary to a structural measure for the budget?
I mean, that's I the thing is that as one, person I interviewed said, "This account has been underfunded more times than it's been fully funded." So, in effect, it's an account that exists for the state. It acts as almost a de facto, crypto rainy day fund 2.0. It's a separate rainy day fund that they don't that they can use for other purposes. They can it's it used to be called the Public Works Trust account, but the money's not protected in any way. So they can use it for general fund purposes. They can use it for the loan that it's supposed to pay for, or they could use it for something else. And so it's that's how it's being used right now. And so the question is, like you said, when is it finally going to actually be put towards the purpose it was created for? And there doesn't seem to be any indication in the near future that that's going to be the case.
Mm. I'd be really interested to see how major players like Seattle, Bellevue, and Spokane, how much money they're putting into this account and how much they're getting out in
That is a
return.
very good question.
Um, yeah, TJ, appreciate you covering the story. And for anyone hoping to read that article, you can get it at thecentersquare.com. But otherwise, TJ, thank you for joining us for another episode of Washington in Focus.